yet another flag. I guess there are a lot of flags and flag poles at the Alito house.
Yeah.
They flew a flag that is, again, it's a flag that has been co-opted, perhaps, but it's flying. That flag is not at the Alito house. That's at Leonard Leo's house, who's head of the Federalist Society. You can put it back up there, but I just wanted to distinguish it. It's the same flag, but it's a different house. Okay, Alito flew that same flag at his beach house. The first flag was the upside down flag that he was flying, the distress sign, right after the J6 incident and the 2020 election. This is the Alito house, his beach house, and that is the flag associated with now insurrection, with any number of things that represent essentially designs on regaining power in Washington.
Well, it's the appeal to heaven flag, and what they're saying is we're appealing to heaven, we're appealing to God to step in and make Donald Trump president again in 2024.
So, the first one was my wife did it. There's been no comment on this one. But what concerns me is, when we touched on it last time, Michael, but just give me another little thought on this. You've got someone who, apart from the president, these Supreme Court justices may have more power than any other legislator or any other person in any position in this country. And this is the kind of bias there is?
Yeah, I mean, that's look, I was more excusing of it and remain so when it's his wife. I mean, she should have the wherewithal to know that she's married to a Supreme Court justice, and she doesn't have to not harbor the opinion she harbors. She's free to do that. But to do this, to fly these flags above their homes, it stands opposed to his impartiality, or presumed impartiality as a justice of the Supreme Court. And, in a way, it furthers the argument. So the good side of it, if you're upset with this, is that it furthers the argument that he should be recused from cases related to January 6th and 2020, because it's not just that his wife flew a flag one day. There seems to be a both thematic and a pattern of hanging these, and they carry a theme. So I more than just when there was one flag, I find it now to be grounds to look further into this. The problem is who polices the Supreme Court? Well, the Supreme Court polices the Supreme Court, and that's what makes it difficult. And and Republicans on Capitol Hill, I think it was John Cornyn, the senator from Texas, who did the turnabout. He said, I don't see them going after Kagan and Sotomayor or other liberal justices. They just have something in for the GOP appointed ones. And then he brought up Clarence Thomas and his confirmation hearings. Those confirmation hearings were in 1991 or 1990. I mean, so this is a long time ago, and it has nothing to, Sotomayor and Kagan aren't flying flags over their house, as far as I know. And if they were, that would be reprehensible too.
Yeah. And now to what the Democrats and those who, it should be bipartisan. I mean, you should at least have the appearance of a lack of bias on the high court. Right. But what can be done? I mean, I always feel as though, as you've said, there's nothing that can be done from a substantive standpoint because you really only have the court itself policing itself. But you could certainly do something and keep the media attention on this. I mean, the court has become so powerful. Why not even begin, Senate judiciary hearings on this or something, Michael, to begin to, go ahead.
You could do that. And the question is, how much attention will this draw? How many people get upset about this? How many people know about this? How inside Washington is this in a way? I look, there are reasons to do exactly what you just said and to call their attention to this. Their biggest argument right now and their biggest fight is to stop, on the Democratic side, is to stop Donald Trump from becoming president. This doesn't really do anything. And so it's not surprising to me that it's not occupying a great deal of their time. They have wars in Israel and Ukraine in their peripheral vision, and they have an election in 2024, which is what they're looking at straight ahead. Senators who would preside over a Judiciary Committee are trying to make sure that Democrats remain in power in the Senate, which is in doubt. So I think that they juggle a lot. This doesn't seem like it's something they want to take up, but it is something that John Roberts could take up, the Chief Justice. It's something that Justice Alito could take up and respond to and recuse himself. I don't think anyone expects that.
That actually does, though, put it in the pure political context that it probably on some level is being calculated as. And that makes sense. So then I turn to some of these other issues that are related to Trump and the next election. I mean, when I see Marco Rubio, for example, going on Face the Nation or whatever it was, maybe it was this one of those Sunday shows, saying that he won't commit to accepting the results of the next election, and he's not alone. I mean, you've got these this GOP leadership, from Mike Johnson on down, that seems to be falling in line with Trump. They show up at his trial, they they wear the unis. And now they are even singing from the same hymnal when it comes to accepting the results of the next election. Have we lost our minds here? What's going on?
I think that this is we just talked about a political year. This is kind of what happens in a political year, right? I mean, there's an audition process going on. Marco Rubio probably wants to be on the ticket. He probably wants to run with Donald Trump. If that is the case, then he's going to, hum that same tune. And it doesn't, I'm not defending it. It's just, I'm saying don't be surprised by it and don't be moved by it necessarily, because this is the kind of exercise that happens. You want to side with the person that you want to be on a ticket with, if that's what your goal is. And that's clearly something Marco Rubio wants. It's been floated. People have talked about it. They're talking about it now with Tom Cotton in Arkansas, another senator, a very conservative senator, but somebody who was not accepting of the results in 2020 and wanted to overturn the election. So you're seeing I shouldn't say overturned, but did not want to accept the results and wanted to look further. But so this is what you see. You see an adherence to what we know is Trump doctrine from people who want to be the name next to Trump on those bumper stickers this year. So I'm not surprised by it.
So in that spirit, I turn to Nikki Haley, somebody who, called Trump an agent of chaos. And, she grilled him. She put him on the rotisserie, at least on the stump. And she even got 20% of the vote in places like Indiana long after she had pulled out of the race. Now she's done an about face, and she says she's going to vote for Trump. And I'm wondering, is that her audition for VP, or how do you see that?
I don't think at all. I don't think that. I think that's Nikki Haley playing smart GOP politics, knowing that if she wants to face voters in 2027 and 2028 for president the next time, she does not want to answer the question, why did you say you weren't voting for Trump? Why did you say that you voted for Biden? She's going to be before Republican voters, most likely in Iowa and New Hampshire again the next time around. And I think that she would be a fool not to say she was voting for Donald Trump. This wasn't a full-throated endorsement. This wasn't I want to be vice president, or I'm campaigning with him every day for the rest of the year. No, this was saying, who are you going to vote for? Are you going to vote for Donald Trump? Yeah, I'm going to vote for Donald Trump. I'm a Republican. And, oh, by the way, I'm saying this under my breath, I want to be president still, and I'm going to run in 2028, and I don't want you to hate me for voting for Biden.
Well, that makes sense also. And you, as long as we're talking vice president, feel who leads that sweepstakes?
It's Scott. I'm terrible at this because I don't spend a great deal of time worried about it, even after they're named. But I'd have to think that Donald Trump, and we know what he wants out of the candidate. He wants someone who's not going to overshadow him. He wants somebody who is going to be loyal to him. And if they're not loyal, they will be cast aside in the way Mike Pence was even 2 weeks before his term was up. So I think that by having, there's another factor too, is that when Donald Trump, if he were to win, he doesn't want MAGA to leave the White House with him. He wants somebody who can carry that torch forward. And in order to do that, you have to find somebody who is a zealot in a way and believes in this part of it, but is also can carry some weight in Washington. I don't think that Marco Rubio will be on the ticket. I could see someone like Tom Cotton more, someone who's very conservative, who also is not necessarily telegenic and going to be a scene stealer for Donald Trump in Florida, a state where he lives, and other places. So, I mean, do I think Tom Cotton? Sure, I think Tom Cotton. I had said Kristi Noem for a long time. I think she's taken herself out of the running with the book that she'd written. But I think he's going to go for a senator. I don't think he's going to go for a member of Congress.
Cotton's a great pick based on the profile that you kind of lay out. And again, on Nikki Haley, yeah, teacher Lori is, of course, right. Again, she said she did not endorse and did not ask her supporters to vote for him. No, she said she was going to vote for him. Okay, so I get it. I think most people
I misspoke if I said that she endorsed it.
No, you didn't. Lori is the police on the show, and it's good to have a cop.
Well, Lori's right. I mean, that's what this was. And by the way, very smart politics. If she wants to be president, and I was advising her, and I was a Republican advisor, I'd say, Governor, you got to go out and say you're going to vote for Donald Trump. Yeah, that's all.
And I have to say the distinction is an important one. I think voters don't pick up on the distinction, but I think that Lori is right. Not endorsing is a distinction that's important, but I think voters don't pick up on it.
I don't think they pick up, but they also don't pick up on any of this. Right. I mean,
of course.
Anybody is going to be moved by Nikki Haley saying I'm voting for Donald Trump, or even her endorsement. I mean, it's not like she has this groundswell of people. In the states where her endorsement would hurt or help, Donald Trump is going to win those states regardless. So again, I think anything Haley says does not impact this. If I'm wrong and she's named running mate, then obviously that changes a little bit. But then of course she's going to vote for him.
Now, quickly, I know you don't like the polls this early, but the polls have shown Trump with an edge for about 8 straight months. The latest, though, is fascinating because it looks as though, as is just suggested here in the New York Times, and there's been a lot of polling that has been pretty thorough in the New York Times, but you could suggest, as Michael has here in this forum before, that it's early and polls can be deceiving, et cetera, especially this early in the game. But we're getting now to times when maybe you can tell me whether or not they become more relevant. Anyway, the lead that Trump has, the one to which I've just referred over the last 8 months, is built on gains among voters who really aren't paying close attention to politics, it's suggested here, who don't follow traditional news and who don't regularly vote. Essentially, disengaged voters who aren't really connected to what's going on in terms of policy, in terms of events. They are driving poll numbers. So if you look at that as a real data point, the last 3 New York Times Siena National polls among those who voted in the 2020 election has really pointed to better news, perhaps, or a more fragile lead that Trump may have than is being represented by 8 months of polling, driven often by these people who are less engaged voters. Can you comment?
Yeah, I think when you look at that pool, it's interesting. Yes, it's interesting. It's interesting that you would, poll people who don't vote regularly, because why would you do that? Like, would you want to know what, would you want to go on Yelp and get the review of the diner from somebody who hadn't eaten there? No. But there, it does show that we're all aware, even most Americans are aware that there's an election going on and who's running, whether or not they participate. And so it gets you a little sort of sense of the zeitgeist that's out there right now, is that casual voters think that it's time for a change, or people who are less invested in it might think it's time for a change or to go back to Trump. But I don't think it impacts where things stand in this race right now. I guess you could look at it and distill it the way you did, Mark, as pretty good news for Biden, because in terms of people who have their minds made up and will be voting and are regular voters and voted in 2020, the president might be doing a little better. But, ask me in September.
The other thing that is sort of wild has to do, I think it's all messaging. I talked, ever since we've been on the air, I talk about messaging. I think it's critical. I think that, honestly, the GOP is helped enormously in the messaging world by a flank, really, of GOP leaning or truly in the tank right-wing media sources, from Fox News to OAN to what is a huge number of right-wing talk radio stations that blanket the country. And we don't even, you don't see them or hear them if you don't live in those parts of the country, but they're out there as well. Anyway,
what they're good at too, Mark, is hardening support, right? It's not that they're winning new people over. I don't think a lot of people who don't have those tendencies listen to that radio. But it hardens the support, and the Democrats don't have that kind of an apparatus. I mean, they have black churches, they have unions, they have special interest groups, but they don't have that kind of an apparatus, and that's important.
There's new Harris polling. Roughly half of the respondents believe that unemployment, which is close to a 50-year low, unemployment, is at a 50-year high. They also believe that stock prices, which have been hitting records and are reported everywhere all the time as hitting records, have been falling. So you have a total disconnect between the reality of what's going on and their perception of things. Right. And this is why I think, sadly, people respond viscerally to this strong, smack-talking guy who's making the crap up. He's the one who's saying this stuff.
Right, of course. And they don't have local newspapers anymore to tell them otherwise. And I think it's a bit, it's not a throwaway line. Like, it's true. It's those people in small town America and other places in America, small cities, large cities, who read local newspapers because they were there. They're not there anymore to give that reporting. And they were the trusted vehicles of news, unlike the national papers like the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, and to some lesser extent the Washington Post. I think that matters hugely in terms of how people are getting their facts and what they're deciding are facts in the first place.
I wanted to share one more little blip here that surprised me. I'm sure you're aware of it, but let me just share it nonetheless with many people in the audience who might be surprised as I was. There's a lot more churn in the electorate than people realize. Even if the turnout stays the same, millions of prior voters will stay home and be replaced by millions who stayed home last time. Historically, around 25% of presidential election voters do not have a record of voting in the previous presidential election. This is partly because of newly registered voters who usually vote in the next election and who have previously voted in a different state, let's say. But it's also because around 30% to 40% of previous registrants who skipped the last election ultimately show up for the next election. So the last thing I'll say is there are good reasons to expect fewer voters in 2024 than in recent cycles. As the 2020 election was the highest turnout election in a century, you'd expect there to be fewer. But if you think that means that there won't be as many new voters, you're already wrong. In fact, 10% of registered 2020 non-voters already turned out and voted in the relatively low turnout 2022 midterms. So this churn that they're talking about is already at work.
Yeah, I mean, it's a work. I don't know enough about it to really speak to it, and that how common or uncommon it is, and how this happens in every election. Why should it impact this one any more than the next? I just don't know the answer to that, but it is certainly interesting. And I think also when you have an election that doesn't seem to be exciting for most Americans, and that's the job of the president, to try and get people excited over the next 6 months, 5 months. I think that probably factors into low turnout as well. Just it's not it's we did this before, we've had this again, and so why are we so excited about this? But that's why the campaigns will go into full throttle after Labor Day, and then you'll start seeing a little more of this.
The court cases with Donald Trump, they don't really hurt him at all. They don't really affect him. He's
Well, I mean, if you're going to go off the polls that I don't like talking about, there was a poll that showed that they did, but I don't understand how they can quantify that because he hasn't been convicted or acquitted yet. And so, but there was a poll that showed that if he were convicted, that he drops, I looked like 4 or 5 points. I didn't really read into it very deeply, but that poll came out today or yesterday. So.
Well, I mean, it's interesting that the legal experts we've had pass through this show feel as though he likely will be convicted, but you never know what a jury is going to do. And
it's also May. It's also May, and you have to remember that he'll be convicted or acquitted in May or maybe early June, right? Depending on what happens, it may be a hung jury. In late October, this is not what people are going to be thinking about. They're not. There may be other cases. There may be that we may still be talking about his legal problems, but the die will have been cast, and that's not what people are going to be voting on. There's going to be something else that happens too that we don't even know exists right now. Whether it's like he had a tape last time, whether something happens with Biden, whether the conventions yield something surprising. So I wouldn't put too much heat. I mean, it's nice to talk about, it's sexy to talk about because it's now, and let's talk about now. We don't have November yet or October, but again, you have to appreciate that time gap in politics, especially now.
Michael, we will talk about campus unrest with you next time and how that may affect voters and the general conversation. It's interesting. I see it in the media a lot, but I want to just spend the last second. Don't get me wrong. I think it's a big deal when I say I see it in the media a lot. I'm just curious how it's landing with voters. Trump's latest New York thing, Tony, do you have it? Can we just play it quickly for Michael and then I'll let him go? Because it was as though he was campaigning for mayor. It was really a weird appearance, They curated this crowd around him, Michael, and then this, the crowd that he sees, there's never been as big a crowd as this. This is amazing.
Anyone of color,
Do you have it? Can you put it up there, Tony, so we can see it?
this community.
He's a crook, a liar, and a cheat, and he tries to make money off people, and that's what he's doing right now.
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you very much. This is some turnout.
Presidential candidate Donald Trump came to the South Bronx today to speak to some supporters and to a fair amount of empty space in Crotona Park. He was as bellicose as you'd expect.
Our black population and our Hispanic population who are losing their jobs, losing their housing, losing everything they can lose.
But Trump is a billionaire, and the South Bronx doesn't house any billionaires. Politically, Trump shouldn't get his hopes up.
If you did a poll about who's more popular, Donald Trump or lead paint, I suspect lead is more popular than Donald Trump in the Bronx.
And yet, look at that crowd. There are a lot of red hats in there.
They're all from out of state. Go out there and look at all them cars that are parked and check them where they came from. Tennessee, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Texas.
Well, maybe
love
not
that
all.
woman.
This young man is from Queens. You ever been to the Bronx before? Yeah!
I've been to the Bronx once. This is my first time coming here.
But like a lot of others,
Oh,
He's a
anyway.
great person. He does care for all the American people, for the country.
He saved the country. We were in great shape. Now we're in terrible shape.
there were a few tense moments as the two sides shared space in the park, but most were tolerant of one another, if dismissive.
I'm not surprised that ignorance is here, and I choose to not be ignorant because I read books.
Donald Trump can now say he held a rally in the South Bronx, home to immigrants and minority communities, and that it was well attended. It's just not clear that the people who attended were
From New York, or from the Bronx. There have to be moments when they're talking to those Trump supporters that you think, oh, I know those people.
My takeaway from that is, as someone who grew up in New York City, I can't believe Jim Dolan is still reporting for Eyewitness. but he's a good reporter, really good reporter. But it's amazing. Look, this what these Trump rallies. You were talking about right-wing media before. These Trump rallies are for right-wing media. They're to show these, the message and remessage and making up the facts and seeing these people from out of state who said he saved America. Well, if America was saved, why it couldn't possibly be bad in a second. Look, I don't think a lot of people there speak Spanish at that rally. I didn't see a lot of African Americans there. It was not a typical South Bronx crowd from the looks of it, but I don't think it matters. It's just Trump getting out there, not leaving the city because he's got to be close to the courthouse, and scheduling these rallies and trying to speak to the lowest common denominator.
Love our time. Thank you, Michael. Walter says, yeah, there were 1,700,000 people at that rally. Kim, before I excuse the witness, did you have something?
I did. I wanted to talk to you about a story that I just saw about Donald Trump's attorneys now trying to block the release of this new biopic that's due out called The Apprentice. Yeah. And Variety says Trump's legal team has sent a cease and desist order or letter to the filmmakers behind this movie. It's based on Trump's real estate career in the 80s. It includes a scene showing him assaulting his then wife, Ivana Trump. So it's not flattering to him in some context. And it doesn't even have a distributor at this point, the movie. But do you think these movies that kind of come out right before elections have much of an impact? And are they right to try to squash it down?
Well, I mean, to answer your two questions, yes, if they try and squash it down, and no, if they don't. I mean, I think they're bringing attention. I never understand why they send the cease and desist up. More people will now watch that film because they sent the desist than would have had they not. So right. It always fascinates me because we all know in America that bad coverage is better than no coverage, and right. No coverage is what this would have gotten. Looks silly. Apparently,
it's a pretty dark film. I was reading about it in Rolling Stone, and they kind of talk about the fact that it's an unvarnished look at him, and it's not bad. Yeah. Meaning not a bad movie. Meaning anyway. Chris, who is our resident Trumpy, said, it looked like a lot more people were at that rally. They were crowded outside of the security zone. Oh, is that it, Chris? Yeah. By the way, the number of people is completely dependent on his people. Because they curated the crowd. They completely curated. His security zone was the one that was set up. So, and this is true, and we made this point long ago. Karen is right. New Yorkers always knew about Trump and did not like him, despised him, is what Karen said. But it is true. Yeah,
that's not friendly territory in New York City. A lot of people from New York City, their opinions about him were made well before he was a public figure. In the pre-Apprentice days, certainly.
Michael, you've been very kind with your time, as you always are, and we look forward to these visits. He's Michael Shure, Shure, across social media and beyond, and you'll see him here on Fridays. And I think you will be part of June's Swoon. You're going to stop in for 10 minutes or so, if possible.
Swoon. I never miss a swoon.
Okay. Michael Shure, everybody. Thanks, Michael. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.